The Dragon King forced the servant girl to hold the burning scale crown to prove low-born hands deserved to burn. The court called it a test, a clean word, a royal word, a word polished enough that nobles could watch pain without admitting they had come to enjoy it. The burning scale crown rested on a black marble altar at the center of the crown hall, surrounded by 7 rings of dragon fire. It did not look like something meant for a human head. It looked alive. Each scale was shaped from ancient gold, sharpened at the edge, layered like the throat plates of a sleeping dragon. Red flame moved beneath the metal without smoke, and every few breaths the crown opened and closed slightly, as if it were breathing through teeth. Everyone in Ashbourne knew the lore of the crown. Royal hands could carry it. False hands burned. Low-born hands turned to ash. If Elara burned, the council would use her ashes to prove no servant hand should ever touch royal power again. That was why Elara Wren had been dragged from the lower furnace kitchens before the entire dragon court. Not because she had stolen, not because she had lied, because she had caught the crown when it fell. 1 hour earlier, during the fire renewal procession, the altar chain had snapped. The burning scale crown had slipped from its golden bearer and tumbled toward the floor. Elara, carrying a tray of ceremonial water, had moved before thought could stop her. Servants learned to catch what nobles dropped. Goblets, knives, blame. So she caught the crown. For one breath, the hall had gone silent. Then someone screamed that her hands should already be gone. They were not. Now she stood barefoot before the altar, wrists stained from scrubbing coal pots, grey servant dress still damp at the hem, palms wrapped in white cloth, because the Crown Council insisted the first touch had been too brief to count. Around her, nobles filled the hall in tiers of silk, scale armor, and bright cruelty. Dragon knights stood beneath banners of black and gold. Flame priests held censer bowls. Servants watched from the walls with the still faces of people trained not to react when one of their own was offered to law. At the top of the hall, Dragon King Kaelor Veyr sat on the obsidian throne. Elara did not look at him. Looking at kings was dangerous. This one more than most. Kaelor had ruled for 8 years beneath a crown that never fully closed around his head. The burning scale crown floated above him in ceremonies, circled him in battle rites, answered his dragon fire, and marked him as ruler. But it never settled, never fused, never completed the ancient bond that old songs said belonged to true dragon kings. The Crown Council said that was because conquest had changed the old laws. The people whispered something else. A king with an unfinished crown ruled with an unfinished fate. Kaelor himself looked anything but unfinished. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and severe, dressed in black armor, veined with molten gold. His dark hair fell to his jaw, and his eyes were a fierce amber, bright as fire behind glass. Power moved around him quietly, like heat waiting beneath stone. No softness lived in his face. But when Elara had caught the crown, he had risen from his throne, only halfway, only for a second. Still, she had seen it. So had High-Crowned Seer Malrek. Now Malrek stood beside the altar in layered red-gold robes, his bald head marked with lines of ash, his hands covered in thin golden gloves. He smiled at Elara, as if mercy had personally asked him to refuse. "Elara Wren," he called, his voice carrying through the hall. "Oath-bound servant of the lower furnace kitchens, you touched the burning scale crown without rank, right, blood, or royale permission." Elara kept her hands still. The white cloth around her palms had begun to smoke. "I caught it before it struck the floor," she said. A murmur passed through the court. Not because she had spoken, because servants were supposed to answer only when the question was safe. Malrek's smile sharpened. "The crown does not require rescue from kitchen hands." No, Elara said quietly, but the bearer dropped it. Somewhere near the noble benches, someone inhaled. Elara lowered her gaze at once. Too late. The words had escaped. A small act of truth. A foolish one. Lady Severine, the king's chosen crown consort, laughed softly from the front of the court. She wore a gown of gold silk and dragon-bone lace, her red hair coiled beneath a circlet shaped like rising flames. She was beautiful in the polished way of weapons displayed before war. How brave, Severine said. The soot girl thinks catching what falls makes her worthy to judge who dropped it. Elara's face burned hotter than the cloth around her palms. Malrek lifted one hand toward the crowd. The old law is clear. If an unworthy hand touches the burning scale crown and does not immediately burn, the touch must be completed before the court. If the crown destroys her, her first survival was accident. If it spares her. He paused. The pause was too neat. Kaelor leaned forward. If it spares her, the king said, what does the law require? Malrek's gaze flicked toward him. An examination, Majesty. That was not my question. The air in the hall tightened. Malrek bowed his head. If the crown spares her fully, the court must hear what the crown recognizes. Elara's heart struck hard against her ribs. Recognizes. The word seemed to wake something in the altar flame. The crown breathed. The cloth around Elara's palms smoked darker. Lady Severine's smile faded by a thread. The flame circlet on her brow dimmed for one breath. Kaelor looked from Malrek to Elara. Remove the wrappings. Malrek turned slowly. Majesty, the bindings protect the hall from contamination. They protect the council from seeing her hands. A silence fell. Elara forgot to breathe. No one had ever said something like that for her. Not with power behind it. Not before witnesses. Her whole life, her hands had been useful and dirty, necessary and beneath notice. Hands that carried coal, washed royal plates, cleaned dragon blood from marble after hunts. Hands that did work too low for noble eyes until those same hands touched a relic no noble could control. Malrek nodded to the guards. The cloth was unwound. Elara expected burns, blisters, blackened skin. Instead, her palms were marked with faint gold lines, not wounds, patterns, like tiny dragon scales beneath the skin. The court saw. Whispers rose fast. Impossibly. Scale marks. En est servant? Malrek's face hardened. Residual crown fire. Nothing more. The burning scale crown pulsed on the altar. Elara felt it in her bones. Not heat. Recognition. Kaelor rose fully from the throne. The hall went still. Proceed, Malrek said too quickly. Two guards seized Elara's arms and pushed her toward the altar. Kaelor moved one step, and the guards froze. The king's voice cut through the hall. She walks by herself. Elara looked at him then. She should not have. His eyes held suspicion. Yes, danger. The cold restraint of a man who had been taught that every unknown thing could become a threat to his throne. But beneath that, something else burned. Not pity, not trust. Recognition he did not want. Elara pulled her arms free from the guards. Then she walked. The 7 rings of dragonfire parted as she approached the altar. They should not have. Servants near the walls pressed their hands over their mouths. Malrek's golden gloves curled into fists. Elara stopped before the crown. The flames beneath it leaned toward her. A voice moved through the metal. Not loud, not human. Late, it whispered. Elara's blood turned cold. She glanced toward Kaelor. His face had changed. He had heard it too. Malrek struck his staff against the floor. Take the crown. Elara lifted her hands. Every instinct in her body screamed not to touch it. Her hands had survived once. Luck did not usually repeat itself for servant girls. The court waited, hungry for proof that she belonged beneath them. Lady Severine watched. As if imagining how pretty Elara's ashes would look on black marble, Elara touched the burning scale crown. Fire swallowed her hands. She did not scream, not because it did not hurt, because the pain stopped being fire. The ancient gold softened under her fingers, melting like liquid sunlight. Scales unfolded, not cutting her skin, but wrapping around her palms, her wrists, her fingers, fitting the gold lines beneath her skin as if the crown had been waiting for the shape of her hands. The court went silent. The crown lifted from the altar, not toward Kaelor, toward Elara. The living gold curled around her hands, like a dragon, recognizing its missing blood. On the throne, the unfinished crown shadow above Kaelor's head cracked open, and from inside the burning scale crown, a woman's voice whispered through the hall. "Queen." Blood returned. Lady Severine's flame circlet went black. Lady Severine's flame circlet went black. Not dim, not flickering. Black. The tiny crown of enchanted fire on her brow, the one the court had praised for months as proof that she carried the proper consort aura, collapsed into a ring of dead embers. For one breath, no one looked at Elara's hands. They looked at Severine. That was the first miracle. The second was that Severine looked afraid. Only for a heartbeat. Then her face smoothed, beautiful and cold, but Elara had seen it. So had Kaelor. So had Malrek, whose golden gloves tightened until the knuckles beneath them showed white. The burning scale crown continued to melt around Elara's fingers. It should have been agony. Ancient dragon gold was not gentle metal. It had killed thieves, failed heirs, oath-breakers, and once, according to kitchen whispers, a prince whose blood was royal, but whose heart was not. But the crown did not devour her hands. It fitted them. Gold scales slid around her wrists like living armor, thin and warm. Lines of light traveled beneath her skin, answering the faint scale marks on her palms. Elara stood frozen, not from pride, but from the terror of being touched by something holy that had not asked permission to recognize her. "Take it off," Severin said. Her voice was too sharp. The court heard. Malrek stepped between the altar and the throne. "The relic has reacted unpredictably. The servant must be contained before contamination spreads." Kaelor's eyes did not leave Elara's hands. "Contain her for surviving? For touching what should have destroyed her? That sounds like the crown has already judged." Malrek turned toward him. "Majesty, with respect, an incomplete crown can be misled." The hall went dangerously quiet. An unfinished crown shadow still hovered above Kaelor's throne, split where the living gold had awakened in Elara's palms. Everyone could see the crack now, a jagged dark line through the faint crown, shape that had followed Kaelor in every public rite since his ascension. It made the king look, for the first time in 8 years, visibly uncrowned. Not false, unfinished. Elara felt the difference before she understood it. The burning scale crown whispered again, not to her ear, to her blood. Not stolen, it breathed. Separated. Elara's fingers curled despite herself. The gold scales moved with her. A hiss went through the court. Malrek noticed. "Do not move your hands." Elara looked at him. "I barely did. You will speak when addressed. A familiar comment. Easy. Old. Worn smooth by years of kitchens and corridors." Elara almost obeyed. Then the gold at her wrists tightened. Not painfully, but like a reminder. She lifted her chin by a fraction. "Then address me properly." The servants along the walls went still. The nobles reacted as if she had thrown ash in their wine. Severin laughed, but the sound had no warmth. Properly. The crown sparks once and the soot girl wants titles. Elara's cheeks burned. The old shame tried to rise. It knew the path well. It had lived in her body longer than the strange gold had. soot girl, kitchen hands, furnace rat, oathbound, lowborn. All the little names nobles used to make servants smaller without seeming cruel. Kaelor stepped down from the throne. One step only. The whole felt it. She held a royal relic and lived, he said. Until the crown finishes speaking, no one in this hall will reduce her to soot. Severine's eyes flashed. Malrek's voice cooled. Majesty, the crown has not finished speaking because it has been touched by blood it should not know. We must determine whether this is recognition or invasion. Invasion? Elara whispered. Malrek faced the court now, not her. That frightened her more. He was no longer arguing to understand what happened. He was teaching them how to fear it. The erased Dragon Queen lines were not gentle bloodlines, he said. They were crown, binders, scale takers, women who could bend royal relics away from rightful kings. Ashbourne buried those lines for a reason. The crown pulsed hot around Elara's hands. Kaelor's jaw tightened. Buried? Malrek paused. A mistake. Small, but real. Kaelor descended another step. The histories say the scale crown queens died out during conquest. They did. Buried is not died out. Malrek's eyes hardened. Some deaths require help to protect a realm. The words fell too cleanly. Elara felt something inside the crown recoil. Not from Kaelor, from Malrek. The gold along her fingers brightened, and a thin image rose above the altar. A woman's hand, darker than Elara's, wearing the same scale. Gold. Then another hand. Then another. A line of women standing beside dragon thrones, not behind them, each with crowns melted into their palms and dragons lowering their heads to the bond. The court gasped. Severine's black circlet smoked. Malrek struck his staff against the floor. The image shattered. Enough, he said. But the crown had shown enough. Kaelor looked at Elara, as if she had become a locked door, and he had just heard something living behind it. What did you hear? He asked. Malrek snapped. She is not to be questioned. Kaelor did not look away from Elara. I asked her. Elara's mouth went dry. Hundreds of noble eyes pressed against her. Servants watched from the walls with faces too still to hope. Severine stared as if Elara's next breath might steal her future. Malrek waited with the expression of a man ready to turn any answer into a crime. Elara looked down at the gold wrapped around her hands. Then she told the truth. It said the crown was not stolen, she whispered. It said it was separated. Kaelor went very still. The unfinished crown shadow above his throne cracked wider. Severine stepped forward. Separated from what? The burning scale crown answered before Elara could. From the hands that complete it. The woman's voice rolled through the hall again, stronger this time, older. Royal enough to make even nobles lower their eyes before they remembered pride. Malrek's face changed. Not with surprise, with recognition. Elara saw it, and felt the ground shift beneath her. You know that voice, she said. Malrek turned toward her slowly. Kaelor did too. Elara wished she could pull the words back, but the crown warmed around her fingers, urging truth onward, like breath toward flame. Malrek smiled faintly. Careful, servant. The gold scales tightened. Elara held his gaze, though fear clawed at her throat. You know her. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Severine lifted both hands to her black circlet and tore it from her brow. The dead ember ring cracked between her fingers, revealing a thin wire of red gold hidden beneath the ornament. It pulsed like a small, borrowed heartbeat. Kaelor saw it. His voice dropped. What is that? Severine's composure broke just enough for hatred to show. Insurance. Malrek moved fast. He lifted his staff, and the 7 rings of dragonfire around the altar reversed, turning inward toward Elara. Flame roared up like walls. The living gold around her hands flared in answer, shielding her palms but not the rest of her body. Kaelor surged forward. The fire struck between them. "Elara," he shouted. The sound of her name, in the Dragon King's mouth, stunned her more than the flame. Malrek's voice cut through the roar. "If the servant carries queen blood, let the crown prove whether it can survive without a king's protection." The fire closed around Elara. She staggered back against the altar. The crown in her hand softened further, sliding past her wrists, up her forearms, forming scale-bright gauntlets that drank the flames before they touched her skin. But every breath hurt. The heat stole air from her lungs. The court blurred beyond the golden fire. Then the altar beneath her split open, not with force, with memory. Inside the black marble, a hidden chamber glowed. Elara saw a row of small golden scales sealed beneath glass, each one engraved with a name. Women's names, queen names. One scale lay cracked in half, and on it was written a name she knew too well. Not from history, not from court records, from the lullaby her mother used to hum before the kitchens took her away. Wren Kaelor Veyr. Elara stopped breathing. The crown whispered through the flames. Daughter of the severed crown. The 7 fire rings exploded outward, and every dragon banner in the hall bowed toward her. Every dragon banner in the hall bowed toward Elara. Not fluttered, bowed. Black and gold silk bent from the high rafters, as if an unseen wind had pressed a royal hand upon each banner's spine. The embroidered dragons lowered their heads toward the servant girl standing before the split altar. Her forearms wrapped in living gold, her grey dress scorched at the hem, her face pale with shock. For one impossible breath, the crown hall forgot how to breathe. Then the whispers began. "Wren Kaelor Veyr?" That name was sealed. No servant carries that blood. Look at the banners. Elara could not move. Wren Kaelor Veyr. Her mother's lullaby name. Not the name the kitchens had used. Not Renna of the lower ash rooms. Not Renna the quiet furnace woman with scarred fingers and tired eyes. Kaelor Veyr. A name with crown fire inside it. A name no servant should have known, let alone hummed over a child's hair in the dark. Elara remembered being 5 years old, curled beneath a flower table, while her mother washed noble cups until her hands bled. Renna had sung softly, almost without sound. "Gold does not kneel to flame. Little scale. Flame remembers gold by name." Elara had thought it a nonsense song. Now the burning scale crown pulsed around her arms like it had been waiting for that lullaby to reach the throne. Kaelor stood on the other side of the broken fire ring, staring at the cracked scale in the altar chamber. His face had gone still, but not empty. She saw too many things moving behind his amber eyes. Suspicion, fury, calculation, and something darker than all three. Need. He did not want to need anything from her. That much was clear. Malrek saw it too. "Majesty," the crown seer said sharply. "Step back from the altar. The relic has opened a forbidden queen. Record. It may be bait." Kaelor did not look at him. "You said the scale crown line died." "It did. Then why is her mother's name sealed beneath my crown altar?" Malrek's golden gloves curled around his staff. "Because dead blood must still be contained." The word struck Elara harder than an insult. Dead blood. Contained. Her mother had not simply died in the lower furnaces, as the kitchens claimed. Her name had been kept under glass beneath the royal altar, like evidence the council could not bear to burn and could not afford to free. The crown whispered again. "Names are locks until spoken." Elara's throat tightened. She looked at the cracked scale beneath the glass. Wren Kaelor Veyr. The hall shook. The glass over the golden scales fractured. Malrek's face went white with rage. "Silence her." 2 guards rushed through the broken fire ring. Kaelor moved first, not with flame, with command. "Stop." The guards froze, as if the word had struck their bones. Elara looked at him across the altar. He had not stepped in front of her. Not this time. He stood beside the truth, watching it with the wariness of a king who knew it might cut him too. Lady Severine recovered before the rest. She threw the broken flame circlet onto the floor. The hidden red-gold wire writhed like a burned worm, still pulsing faintly. "You are all losing your senses over a kitchen trick," she said. "The servant caught a relic, and the relic reacted to old blood buried in the altar. That does not make her queen blood. It makes her convenient." Elara looked at her. For the first time, the crown consort looked less untouchable. Without the flame circlet, Severine's beauty seemed colder, sharpened by fear rather than confidence. Kaelor's eyes dropped to the red-gold wire. "Who gave you that?" Severine's mouth tightened. Malrek answered too quickly. "A ceremonial stabilizer. The consort aura must be balanced during crown rites." The burning scale crown hissed around Elara's wrists. "Li." The word moved through the gold, so clearly Elara nearly flinched. Kaelor heard it too. His gaze snapped to her hands. Elara whispered, "It says you lied." The court recoiled. Malrek lifted his staff, but Kaelor's dragonfire flared once along the floor between them. "Careful," the king said. Malrek bowed his head, but hatred burned through the gesture. "Majesty, you risk your crown by indulging a relic-tainted servant." Kaelor's voice went cold. "My crown appears to be speaking through her. That is precisely the danger." Elara's hands trembled. The golden gauntlets tightened in response, not painfully, holding her together. That frightened her more than fire. She did not want a crown to comfort her. She did not want the court to look at her as if her blood had suddenly made her valuable. Yesterday she had been nobody. This morning she had been a servant girl to burn. Now they stared, as if she might be a throne with skin. "I do not want your crown," she said. The words rang through the hall. Kaelor looked at her. Something unreadable crossed his face. Severin laughed softly. How noble, how humble, how exactly like a girl pretending she has not already placed herself at the center of the court. Elara's face burned, but before shame could take root, one of the servants at the wall stepped forward. An old furnace woman, Mara, who had once pressed bread into Elara's palm when she was too hungry to stand. "My lord," Mara said, voice shaking. Her mother had scale marks too. The hall turned on her. Mara nearly stepped back. Elara's heart lurched. "Mara, no." But the old woman lifted her chin, terrified and brave. "Renna kept them wrapped. Said kitchen smoke made the skin crack. But I saw gold lines on her hands the night they took her." Malrek's eyes sharpened. "Took her?" "Madapalith," Kaelor spoke. "Who took her?" Mara looked at Elara with apology already forming. "The Crown Council." The hall erupted. Malrek slammed his staff down, and golden flame burst around Mara's feet. Elara screamed. The burning scale crown answered. Living gold shot from her hands across the hall, faster than thought. It wrapped around Mara's ankles, not binding her, shielding her. The golden fire from Malrek's staff struck the scale gold and shattered into sparks. Elara stared at what she had done. So did everyone else. Kaelor's unfinished crown shadow cracked again, and for one instant, a second shadow appeared beside it. Not a king's crown, a queen's crown, hollow, waiting. Malrek saw it and abandoned subtlety. "Seize the servant," he ordered, "before the crown chooses against the throne." Kaelor turned slowly. His voice came low enough to make the banners tremble. "The crown is not choosing against the throne." He looked at Elara then, and for the first time he did not hide the fear in his eyes. "It is showing me what my throne was built without." The altar chamber split wider. The golden scales beneath the glass lifted into the air one by one, spinning above Elara like a broken constellation of crowns. Each scale bore a woman's name. Each name burned awake as the crown gold around her hands brightened. Then the cracked scale with Wren's name rose last. It hovered before Elara's face. A voice came from it. Soft, tired, and unbearably familiar. Elara, her mother's voice. Elara forgot the court, forgot the king, forgot the crown. The golden scale trembled in the air, and Wren Veyr whispered, "Do not let Malrek put the crown back on him unfinished." Elara knew her mother's voice before her mind could make sense of it. It came from the cracked golden scale hovering before her face, soft and worn at the edges, the same voice that had once hummed under kitchen smoke, while little Elara hid from winter drafts beneath flower tables. Not the voice of a queen, not the voice of history. Her mother's voice. Do not let Malrek put the crown back on him unfinished. The crown hall seemed to tilt. Kaelor stood across the broken altar, his face gone dangerously still. The unfinished crown shadow above his throne trembled like a wound in the air, while beside it the faint hollow shape of a queen's crown flickered and vanished as if waiting for a breath it had not taken in years. Malrek moved first. He struck his staff against the marble, and a ring of gold fire rose between Elara and the scale bearing Wren's name. The scale did not burn. It rang. The sound cut through the hall, like a blade passing over glass. Every golden scale floating above the altar answered, spinning faster, each name burning brighter. Avlin Kaelor Veyr, Myrith Crownborn, Seren of the First Flame, Wren Kaelor Veyr. Names Elara had never been taught, names the court had been trained to forget. Enough, Malrek said. His voice no longer carried ceremonial calm. It carried fear, dressed as command. Kaelor heard it. Why? Malrek turned toward him. Majesty, why must I not be crowned unfinished? The question moved through the hall. With the force of dragonfire held behind teeth, Malrek's golden gloves smoked. Lady Severin stepped forward before he could answer. Because the throne cannot survive another fracture. Your crown is stable as it is. The burning scale crown tightened around Elara's hands. Stable is not whole, it whispered. Elara repeated it before she could stop herself. Stable is not whole. Kaelor's eyes snapped to hers. Not with anger, with something worse. Hope he did not trust. Severin's face sharpened. How convenient that the servant suddenly speaks in relic riddles. Elara looked at her blackened circlet lying cracked on the floor. The hidden red gold wire inside still pulsed faintly, like a stolen heartbeat trying to survive outside a body. What was your circlet holding? Elara asked. Severin's mouth closed. The living gold around Elara's fingers warmed. A thin strand of molten scale uncurled from her wrist and moved across the floor toward the broken circlet. The court watched as the gold touched the red gold wire. The wire screamed, not loudly, worse, like metal remembering pain. A vision opened above it. Severin kneeling before Malrek in a private crown chamber, her flame circlet resting in his hands. Malrek threaded red gold through it while whispering old crown. Law. If the king's crown will not close, yours must pretend the missing half is already beside him. Severin's younger face looked pale. And if the crown senses the truth, then we make the court fear the hands it chooses. The vision shattered. The hall erupted. Severin looked exposed for one breath, then furious. You think I wanted a false aura? Do you know what it means to be bred your whole life for a throne that refuses to recognize you? Elara said nothing. She did know something about being shaped for other people's use. Not in Silic, not with tutors and gold, but use was use. Severin's voice shook with rage. I was promised that if I stood beside him long enough, the crown would accept me. Every noble house watched. Every rival waited for me to fail. And then you, with coal under your nails, catch what I have spent my life reaching for. The words were cruel, The wound beneath them was real. Malrek stepped between Severine and the court. Her pain is irrelevant. The issue is treasonous blood, awakening a conquest relic. The crown gold burned hotter. Elara flinched. Kaelor saw it. Is it hurting you? The question stunned her. So small, so wrong. For a hall full of accusation, she looked down at her hands. The gold had climbed halfway to her elbows now. Beautiful and terrifying. It did not burn her skin, but it was heavy with voices, with old names, with memories pushing at the edges of her bones. Yes, she admitted. Kaelor's face changed. He moved toward her. Malrek lifted his staff. Do not touch her. If the crown has begun binding through her blood, contact may complete the claim. Kaelor stopped. Not from obedience. From fear for her, Elara noticed. So did Malrek. So did Severine. The crown seer smiled faintly. There is wisdom left in you, Majesty. Kaelor's eyes turned molten. Do not mistake restraint for loyalty. The golden scale, with Renna's name, drifted closer to Elara. Her mother's voice came again, weaker now. The crown was never stolen from his line. It was severed from ours. A king may carry dragonfire, but a scale crown queen teaches the crown whom not to burn. Elara's throat tightened. Where are you? The scale flickered. Beneath the hole, the words passed through the metal like breath through ash. Not dead. Bound. Malrekstruck. This time he did not aim for Elara. He aimed for the scale. Kaelor's dragonfire intercepted the blow. Gold-red flame crashed against white crown fire, shaking the hall. Servants screamed. Nobles scattered. The floating queen scales whirled into a shield around Elara, and the burning scale crown lifted her hands as if guiding her. Elara hated that, hated being moved, hated needing a relic to survive. No, she whispered. The crown paused. The gold loosened enough for her fingers to tremble. I will not be another hand you use without asking. Silence fell through the fire. The crown answered, softer this time. Then choose. Elara looked at Kaelor. He stood with one hand still raised, dragonfire burning along his arm, eyes fixed on her rather than the crown. For the first time, the Dragon King looked less like a threat, and more like a man standing before a door he was afraid to open, because someone else might be crushed beneath it. What happens if I choose wrong? She asked. Kaelor's answer came quietly. Then we stop. Vey? The word shook her. Malrek's face darkened. There is no we. There is crown, throne, and bloodline. That is all. Elara turned toward him, the queen's scales circling around her like golden moons. No, she said. There are hands. The crown flared. Every servant in the hall looked up. Elara lifted her gold-wrapped palms. My mother's hands. The queen's hands. The hands you burn to make kings easier to crown. The black marble altar split deeper. A stairway appeared beneath it, descending into red-gold darkness. From below came the sound of chains dragging across scales. Renna's voice whispered one final warning. If he wears the crown before the bound queens are freed, it will close around his soul instead of his head. Kaelor Veyr, Malrek screamed, seal the altar! But the burning scale crown had already opened the way, and beneath the dragon court, something crowned in chains began to wake. The stairway beneath the altar breathed heat, not ordinary heat, not kitchen fire heat, not furnace heat, not the clean ceremonial flame priests carried in golden bowls. This heat was older, heavier, almost alive. It rose from beneath the crown hall in slow waves, carrying the scent of molten gold, dragon bone, and something Elara could not name until the first sound climbed out of the darkness. A woman crying through clenched teeth. The servants along the walls made the sign against cursed fire. Nobles retreated behind dragon knights. Lady Severin stared at the open stairway with terror she could not polish into arrogance quickly enough. Kaelor did not move. His eyes were fixed on the steps beneath the split altar. "Bound queens," he said quietly. The burning scale crown tightened around Elara's forearms, not in warning, in grief. Malrek lifted both hands. "There are no bound queens beneath this hall. There are only unstable relic echoes, Majesty. The servant's blood has disturbed a sealed foundation rite." Kaelor turned his head. "You have lied badly tonight." Malrek's mouth hardened. "Because truth, spoken too early, can destroy kingdoms." Elara looked at him across the broken altar. "No. It destroys the people who built kingdoms on lies." The words surprised her. They surprised the court more. A kitchen servant should not have spoken judgment in the crown hall. But the living gold around her hands had changed how silence worked. Every time she tried to fold back into obedience, the crown remembered a woman before her who had been silenced, burned, or hidden beneath glass. The stairway shuddered. From below came Wren's voice again, thinner now. "Elara." Her mother's voice wrapped around her heart and pulled. Elara stepped toward the stairs. Kaelor stepped with her. Malrek snapped, "Majesty, if you descend while the crown is open, it will force completion." Kaelor stopped. Elara did too. "What does that mean?" she asked. Malrek smiled, and for the first time that night, there was no ceremony in it. Only cruelty. "It means the crown has found what it needs, but not what it wants. A king, a queen blood hand, a broken foundation. Put them together wrongly, and the burning scale crown will close by feeding on both." Severin's voice came strained. "You told me the foundation was stable. I told you what your ambition needed to hear." Her face went white. Elara looked from one to the other and understood something cold. Malrek had used Severin too. Not innocently, not gently, but he had fed her hunger, sharpened her insecurity, dressed her in false flame, and pointed her at the throne like a blade that believed itself chosen. Severin saw the understanding and hated her for it. "Do not pity me," she said. "I do not," Elara answered. That was true. Pity would have been too simple. Kaelor's gaze shifted to Elara. "You do not have to go down." The hall quieted. Elara almost laughed, but it would have sounded too close to breaking. Her mother was beneath the crown hall. The queen line was chained beneath the altar. The crown on her hands knew her blood, and every noble in the court had just learned enough to fear her, but not enough to stop using her. Of course, she had to go down, but she heard what Kaelor truly meant. "You do not have to go down for me." That mattered. Not enough to make her trust him. Enough to make her look at him fully. "If I go," she said, "you do not command my hands." Kaelor's eyes held hers. "No. If the crown tries to use me, you help me stop it." "Yes. If your throne requires someone beneath it to suffer, then your throne deserves to crack." A murmur surged through the court. Kaelor did not rebuke her. He only said, "Then let it crack." The burning scale crown flared so bright that the banners bowed again. Elara descended first. The gold around her arms lit the stairwell. Kaelor followed one step behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat of his dragon fire, far enough that his shadow did not swallow hers. Above them, Malrek shouted orders, but no guard dared enter the stairway while the crown burned. The passage curved beneath the hall, carved from black stone veined with gold. The walls were covered in old reliefs, queens standing beside kings, not behind them. Dragons lowering their heads to women with scale, marked hands. Crowns split in two halves, one worn, one held. Elara slowed. All her life, she had seen royal murals where men held swords, crowns, fire, law. Women stood behind them as wives, mothers, offerings. ornaments. Here, women held the crown fire. Someone had buried the wall where truth still survived. At the bottom of the stairs, the passage opened into a vast circular chamber, the crown vault. 7 dragon skeletons arched overhead, their rib bones forming the ceiling. At the center stood a golden throne without a seat, only a ring of scale-shaped chains descending into a pit of red light. Around the pit knelt 7 statues of women made not from stone, but from cooled gold. No, not statues, bodies. Each queen was wrapped in scale chain, head bowed, hands extended toward the pit, as if forced to hold up the foundation of the throne above. One of them lifted her face. Elara's heart stopped. Elara Wren looked older than in memory, her skin lined by pain, her dark hair streaked with ash gold, but her eyes were Elara's eyes. "Elara," she whispered. Elara ran to her. Kaelor caught her before she reached the chain circle. The moment his hand closed gently around her arm, golden fire erupted from the floor between Elara and Wren. Kaelor released her instantly. Wren's gaze moved to him, not with hatred, with warning. "The crown knows your fire, Dragon King," she said. "But this vault was built to punish queens for completing it." Kaelor's face went still. Elara's voice broke. "Mother." Wren looked back at her daughter, and her expression softened so fiercely that Elara nearly shattered. "My little scale." The burning scale crown melted farther up Elara's arms, forming delicate gold patterns across her shoulders. Wren's face changed. "No, it has begun binding." Malrek's voice echoed from the stairway above. "Yes," he called. "And if the servant girl wants her mother freed, let her finish what her blood was born to do." Elara turned. Malrek stood at the top of the vault stairs, Severine beside him, and 6 crown guards behind them. In his hand, he held the broken red gold wire from Severine's circlet. He smiled. "Crown the king," Malrek said, "or watch the queens beneath him burn." "Crown the king," Malrek said, "or watch the queens beneath him burn." The crown vault answered with fire. Red gold light surged from the pit at the center of the chamber, climbing the scale-shaped chains that held the 7 queens in place. One by one, the bound women stiffened, their golden bodies cracked at the shoulders, wrists, throats, and each crack glowed with pain too old to scream properly. Elara lunged toward Wren. Kaelor caught her again, but this time she tore free before he could speak. "Do not touch me, if you are going to stop me." His hand fell away. The words had come out sharper than she meant them to, but she could not apologize. Not with her mother kneeling in chains, not with Malrek standing above them, smiling as if he had finally placed every piece where he wanted it. Kaelor's face hardened, not with anger at her, with restraint. "I am not stopping you," he said. "I am stopping the vault from making you pay before you choose." The burning scale crown pulsed around Elara's shoulders. Choose. The word no longer felt simple. If she refused, the bound queens burned. If she crowned Kaelor too soon, the crown might close around his soul instead of his head, making him the kind of king Malrek wanted, powerful, crowned, and controlled by the suffering beneath him. If she stepped into the crown's demand, she might become another queen holding up a throne from below. Malrek knew it. That was why he smiled. Severine stood beside him at the stairway, the false circlet gone from her brow. Without it, her face looked colder, more naked. She held herself like a woman refusing to tremble before people who had taught her trembling was failure. "Elara," Wren whispered. Elara turned back to her mother. The scale chains around Wren's arms glowed hotter. Still, her eyes remained clear. "Do not crown fear." Elara's throat tightened. "Tell me what that means." "It means a crown completed under threat becomes another chain." Malrek laughed softly. "Beautiful words from a woman who has held up my king's foundation for 18 years. Kaelor, move then." Not toward the crown, toward Malrek. Dragonfire climbed his arms, molten gold beneath black armor. The vault shook under the force of his anger. Above them, the dragon skeletons groaned as if remembering life. Malrek lifted the red gold wire from Severine's broken circlet. "One more step, Majesty." The wire pulsed. The queens cried out. Kaelor stopped. Elara saw the blow land inside him. Not physical, worse. Malrek had trained the king's mercy into a leash. Every time Kaelor reached for justice, someone else paid the price. The burning scale crown whispered through Elara's blood. A king held by hostage fire cannot wear a whole crown. Elara looked at Kaelor. He had heard it. His jaw tightened. Severine's gaze flicked between them. "You both think yourselves noble, but hesitation kills faster than cruelty. Malrek will not stop." "No," Elara said. "But you can." Severine's face sharpened. "Do not turn your servant pity on me. You were wearing the false aura. You know how it was made. I know what I was promised. A throne? A place." The word tore out before Severine could polish it. Her eyes flashed with fury, as if she hated Elara for hearing the truth inside it. "Do you understand that? I was raised to be acceptable to the crown. Every meal, every lesson, every breath, measured by whether I could stand beside him. Then the crown never looked at me. Not once. So yes, when Malrek offered me fire that would make the court stop waiting for me to fail, I took it." Elara did not soften, but she understood. That made the cruelty more painful, not less. "You took borrowed fire," Elara said quietly, "and let them burn other women to feed it." Severine looked away. Malrek's voice cracked through the vault. "Enough! Severine, bind the servant." She did not move. Malrek turned slowly. The silence was small, dangerous. Severine's hand tightened around the torn sleeve of her gold gown. "You said the queen line was dead. It is dead." Renna lifted her head despite the fire burning through her chains. "Then why do you fear my daughter's hands?" Severine flinched. The other bound queens raised their faces, one by one. The vault changed, not with magic first, with witness. 7 women, burned into living gold, looked at the crown consort who had worn false flame above them. Severine's pride cracked beneath that gaze. She had wanted a throne, but now she saw the foundation she had been trained not to question. Malrek saw it too. His expression turned ugly. "If you will not bind her," he said, "then you are as useless as the rest." He snapped the red gold wire. Severine screamed. The sound tore through the vault as black-red flame burst from the place where her circlet had once sat. The false aura had not only sat on her brow, it had rooted there. Kaelor moved toward her. Malrek struck the floor with his staff, and the vault chains pulled tighter around the queens. Elara had no time to think. She lifted both gold-wrapped hands and shouted, "Stop!" The burning scale crown obeyed. Living gold shot from her arms in 7 bright strands. One wrapped around Renna's chain, one around each queen, not breaking them, holding them still. The fire stopped climbing. Elara staggered under the weight. Kaelor turned. "Elara, I can hold it," she lied. Renna's eyes filled with terror. "No, little scale. Not alone." "The crown," answered her mother. "Not alone." Its voice moved through the vault, and every golden scale in the chamber flared. Kaelor understood first. He stepped beside Elara, close enough for his dragonfire to meet the living gold, but not touch her skin. "Tell me where to stand," he said. "Not command, not assumption. Offer." Elara looked at the floor. The old reliefs beneath their feet showed a king and queen standing on either side of the crown altar, hands apart, fire between them, not one above the other, not one feeding the other. Beside, here, she whispered. Kaelor placed his blood-warm palm against the air beside her golden hand. Dragon fire rose from him, not taking the crown gold, but lending heat to it. The 7 strands steadied. The queens exhaled. Malrek's smile died. Severin fell to her knees, one hand pressed to her burned brow, staring at Elara and Kaelor with something between hatred and grief. The burning scale crown lifted from Elara's arms in liquid arcs, forming half a crown above Kaelor and half above Elara. The vault thundered. Malrek shouted, "No!" But the crown did not close. It waited, and from the pit beneath the bound queens, a dragon queen's voice rose like molten gold. "Name the one who severed us. Name the one who severed us." The dragon queen's voice rose from the pit beneath the crown vault, deep and molten, filling the chamber until even the dragon skeletons overhead seemed to shiver. The 7 bound queens lifted their heads. The scale chains around their arms stopped glowing with pain and began to glow with witness. Elara stood beside Kaelor with living gold stretching from her hands into the chains, holding back the fire meant to consume her mother and the other queens. Kaelor's dragonfire burned beside her, close enough to warm her skin, careful enough not to claim it. Above them, the burning scale crown hovered in 2 halves, one half over the king, one half over the servant girl. Waiting. Malrek's face had gone bloodless. For the first time since Elara had been dragged into the crown hall, the high crown seer looked less like the voice of law and more like a man standing before a grave he had forgotten could open. "Do not answer it," he said. His voice cracked. The sound moved through Elara, like proof. Kaelor turned toward him. "Why?" Malrek lifted his staff, but the crown gold around Elara's wrists flared, and every scale name spinning in the vault burned brighter. Avlin Scale Veyr, Mirith Crownborn, Seren of the First Flame, Renna Scale Veyr. Names of queens who had once stood beside dragon kings and taught crowns not to burn the hands that completed them. Names buried beneath Kaelor's throne. Names Elara had never been allowed to know. Renna looked at her daughter. "The crown cannot heal what remains unnamed." Elara's throat tightened. "Then tell me." Malrek laughed once, sharp and desperate. "Listen to her, Majesty. The bound queen begs her daughter to accuse the council. Convenient." Kaelor did not look away from Malrek. "She does not need convenience. She has chains." Severin remained on her knees near the stairway, one hand pressed to the burned place where her full circlet had rooted into her skin. Her face was pale with pain, but her eyes were fixed on the bound queens. Something in her had broken open. Not enough for innocence, enough for truth to enter. "Elara," Renna said softly, "the one who severed us was not conquest." The vault went still. Kaelor's face sharpened. For years, Elara knew, his reign had rested on that story. Conquest had ended the old queen line. War had destroyed the scale crown heirs. The crown had become incomplete because history was brutal, but necessary. Renna lifted her chained hands. Golden cracks ran across her wrists. "Conquest wounded the crown," she said. "Malrek made the wound useful." Malrek slammed his staff against the floor. "Lies." The Dragon Queen's voice rose from the pit again. "Name him." The vault answered. The golden floor beneath Malrek's feet turned transparent, revealing a memory below. A younger Malrek standing in this same vault with his hands ungloved, pressing a red gold brand into the palm of a chained queen. Behind him stood members of the Crown Council, their faces hidden beneath dragonbone masks. Before him knelt Renna, alive and bleeding, her hands glowing with scale marks. Elara stopped breathing. Renna's younger self held her head high despite the chains. "You cannot complete a king by burying his crown's other half," she said. Younger Malrek smiled. "I do not need to complete him. I need him dependent." Kaelor went motionless. The memory continued. A counselor whispered, If the king learns the queen line lives, he may seek them. Then he must believe they died, Malrek replied. And every daughter born from that line must learn to hold brooms instead of crowns. Elara's hands began to shake. The living gold shook with them. Kaelor noticed instantly. His dragonfire steadied, supporting the golden strands without touching her. "Breathe," he said quietly. She hated that she obeyed, not because he commanded it, because she needed to. The memory shifted. Wren was dragged toward the chain circle. She was younger than Elara remembered, her face fierce beneath soot and blood. In her arms, she held a small bundle. A baby. Elara. Wren screamed as Malrek reached for the child. No. The word tore out of Elara before she knew she had spoken. Wren's living gaze softened from within the chains. "You were 3 months old." The memory showed an old furnace woman, Mara, younger, then waiting near a hidden service arch. Wren kissed the baby's forehead once, then shoved the bundle into Mara's arms. "Take her below," Wren whispered. "Make her small. Make her useful. Make her survive." Mara flit, younger Malrek, struck Wren across the face. The memory blurred into fire. Elara's vision filled with tears. She did not care who saw. The court had already seen her humiliated, accused, offered to fire. Let them see this too. Let them see that a servant girl's grief was not smaller because her hands had scrubbed ash. Kaelor's voice cut through the memory, low and deadly. "You knew." Malrek's jaw tightened. "You knew the scale. Crown line survived," Kaelor said. Malrek lifted his chin. "I knew what the throne required." "No. You knew what would make kings easier to steer." The burning scale crown flared above them. Severine spoke then, voice hoarse from pain. "And my circlet?" Malrek turned toward her. She rose unsteadily. "What was I?" "Necessary." The word struck her harder than insult. Severine laughed once, broken and ugly. "Not chosen. Not even useful in the way I thought. Necessary." Malrek's patience snapped. "You wanted the throne. I gave you fire enough to stand near it. You gave me borrowed flame from bound women. You accepted it." Severine flinched. The truth landed. Not all guilt belonged to Malrek. Not all damage erased choice. Elara saw Severine absorb that, and for the first time, the crown consort looked less like an enemy made of gold, and more like a woman standing in the ruin of what she had allowed herself to become. Malrek lifted his staff toward the pit. "Enough. If the crown wants a name, it may have mine." Kaelor's eyes narrowed. Too late. Elara understood. Malrek wanted to be named on his terms. A martyr. A necessary monster. A man who could turn judgment into legend. But the crown did not move. The Dragon Queen's voice came again. Not title. Truth. Elara looked at the memory still burning under the floor. She saw Malrek's hand pressing brands into queen palms. She saw council seals on chain locks. She saw Severine's false circlet being fed by red gold wires. She saw Kaelor kneeling as a young king, while Malrek crowned him with an incomplete flame and called it destiny. Then she understood. The one who severed them was not only Malrek. It was the law, he wrote. The council that obeyed. The throne that accepted the missing half, because power still sat comfortably enough without it. Elara lifted her head. Her voice shook, but the crown carried it. "High crown, Seer Malrek, severed the scale crown queens from the throne," she said. "The crown council chained them beneath Ashbourne. They fed their fire into false consort auras and incomplete kings. They called our hands low, born so no one would look for queen blood in the kitchens." The vault thundered. Kaelor's face tightened at the words incomplete kings, but he did not reject them. Instead, he added, "And my throne benefited from the wound." The crown stilled. Elara looked at him. He held her gaze, and there was no defense in his eyes. No wounded pride, only a king taking the cut, Because truth required blood, the burning scale crown lowered, not onto his head, not onto hers. Between them, the 7 chains around the bound queens cracked at once. Malrek screamed, "Stop!" But the first chain broke, then the second, then the third. Renna gasped as living gold poured back into her hands. Elara reached for her mother. This time no fire blocked her. Their fingers touched. Renna was warm, real, bound, wounded, half gold, but real. "My little scale," she whispered. Elara broke, only for 1 second. Then the vault ceiling split open above them, revealing the crown hall and the court staring down through the cracked altar. Every noble saw the bound queens. Every servant saw them. Every dragon knight saw the foundation beneath their king, and the burning scale crown rose between Elara and Kaelor like a sun made of judgment. "Choose," it whispered. This time, the word was not for Elara alone. It was for the king. The burning scale crown asked the king to choose, not between women, not between throne and servant, between the comfort of an incomplete reign and the wound it had been built upon. Kaelor stood in the crown vault with dragonfire burning along one arm, blood at his palm where Malrek's staff had scorched him, and the half-formed crown hovering before him like judgment made of molten sun. Across from him stood Elara Wren, kitchen ash still dark at the hem of her grey dress, living gold wrapped around her hands and arms, her face wet with tears she had not tried to hide. Behind her, 7 scale crown queens breathed for the first time, without chains tightening around their throats. Above them, through the split ceiling, the crown hall looked down. Nobles, servants, dragon knights, flame priests. Every person who had ever believed the throne was solid, because they had never seen what held it up. Malrek stood near the stairway, shaking with fury. "Majesty, do not answer a relic while it is under blood influence." Kaelor did not look at him. "The relic is not under blood influence." The crown pulsed. Kaelor's gaze moved to the freed queens, then to the golden cracks still running through their bodies, then to Elara Veyr, who stood with one hand locked around her daughters, as if she feared the world might steal Elara again if she loosened her grip. "The blood was under mine," he said. The vault went still. Elara looked at him. Kaelor felt the weight of that look more sharply than he had felt any blade. There was no worship in it, no gratitude, no softening, because he had finally said what should have been obvious. Only attention, careful, wounded, and honest. She was waiting to see what kind of king truth made him. The burning scale crown whispered again, "Choose." Kaelor lifted his burned hand. Malrek surged forward. "If you complete the crown with the queens unbound, they will have standing. Their bloodline will have claim. She will have claim." "She already does," Kaelor said. A sound moved through the hall above. Elara's fingers tightened around Renna's. Kaelor heard the fear in that sound. Not fear of justice, fear of rearrangement. Nobles could tolerate a servant being revealed as special if she became ornamental quickly enough. They could even tolerate a forgotten bloodline if it knelt prettily before the throne. What they feared was a foundation that stood up and began speaking. Kaelor faced the open ceiling. "You all heard the crown," he said. "You saw the vault. You saw the queens bound beneath the throne. Any house that claims surprise may keep its pride for tonight. At dawn, it will bring records." The nobles shifted. Malrek laughed sharply. "Records? You think parchment will solve a severed crown?" "No," Kaelor said. "But it will tell me which families profited from the severing." Silence fell hard. Elara watched him. The crown waited. Kaelor lowered his hand, not to his own head, but toward the space between himself and Elara. "I will not wear a whole crown while the queen line remains under judgment," he said. "I will not finish my reign by swallowing the bloodline that completes it. The burning scale crown flared so brightly that everyone shielded their eyes. Malrek screamed, "Weakness!" Kaelor turned on him at last. "No," he said. "Restraint." He looked back at Elara. "If the crown requires her hands," he said to the vault, to the hall, to the old law itself, "then it will ask them. If the queen line stands beside the throne, it will stand because it chooses to rise, not because I have found a prettier way to chain it." The living gold on Elara's arms loosened. For the first time since the crown had melted into her skin, she drew a full breath. Wren closed her eyes, and tears slipped down her gold-cracked face. The crown answered, not with a command, with release. The half-crown over Kaelor dissolved into molten light. The half-crown over Elara did the same. Both streams poured downward, not onto heads, but into the broken chains around the queens. One by one, the chains melted into harmless gold dust. Avaline Kaelor Veyr straightened. Myrith Crownborn lifted her hands. Seren of the First Flame opened eyes that burned dragon gold, and Wren stepped fully out of the chain circle. Elara moved toward her mother, but this time she did not run like a child toward rescue. She walked, shaking, wounded, alive, with living gold still circling her wrists like proof she had survived being chosen by fire. Wren reached for her. Mother and daughter touched foreheads. The crown hall above was silent enough to hear Elara break. It was not loud, only one breath, one small sound, but it carried all the years she had spent believing her mother had died in smoke. All the nights she had scrubbed noble plates under a name made small for survival. All the times she had hidden hands that were not dirty but royal. In a way, the court had feared too much to name. Kaelor looked away, not because he did not care, because some grief should not be watched by a king, unless invited. Severine saw him turn his head. Something in her face altered then, not softened exactly, but stripped of one more lie. Perhaps she realized that the throne she had wanted had never taught anyone how to be seen gently. Malrek did not allow the moment to last. He plunged the red gold wire from Severine's false circlet into the vault floor. The wire screamed into the cracks. The melted chain dust rose violently, twisting into a crown-shaped cage around Elara and Wren. Malrek's voice rang with triumph. "If the king will not complete the crown, the vault will choose a sacrifice." Kaelor reached for dragonfire. The cage tightened before he could move. Elara gasped as the living gold around her wrists turned hot again. Wren cried out, her half-healed body flickering between flesh and gold. The other queens tried to step forward, but the vault floor opened beneath their feet, locking them in rings of fire. Malrek lifted both hands. Old foundation law. If severed blood rises without enthronement, one queen must return below to stabilize the crown. Severine stared at him. "You knew this would happen. I designed it." The words fell naked into the vault. Kaelor's face went deadly still. Above, the court heard. Every servant heard. Elara heard. But her attention was on the cage, closing around her mother. Wren gripped her shoulders. "Elara, listen to me. No, my little scale. No." Elara's voice broke, but her hands closed around the burning gold bars. "I did not find you under the throne to watch you go back beneath it." Wren's eyes filled. "Then do not let him make you take my place either." The cage tightened. The burning scale crown had gone silent. No, not silent. Waiting again. Elara understood. The crown had released the queens. Malrek had triggered a law written afterward, a trap beneath the old trap. A law that demanded a queen beneath the throne whenever a king refused to complete power through domination. A law could be old and still be evil. Kaelor stepped to the edge of the cage, dragon fire burning over both hands now. "Tell me how to break it." Malrek smiled from the stairway. You cannot. Not without declaring yourself false to the foundation that crowned you. Kaelor looked at Elara. The entire court seemed to lean toward his answer. If he broke the foundation law, he risked his right to rule. If he obeyed it, he preserved his throne by burying a queen. Elara saw the decision forming. So did Malrek. Kaelor's voice came quiet. Then let the foundation call me false. Malrek's smile died. Kaelor drove both dragonfire-covered hands into the crown-shaped cage. Gold fire exploded. Elara screamed his name, not because she feared him, because the cage burned through his armor and into his skin. Kaelor did not let go. Crowns do not make kings, he said through clenched teeth. What they refuse to bury does. The cage cracked. The burning scale crown woke with a roar. And this time, it flew toward Kaelor and Elara together. The burning scale crown flew toward Kaelor and Elara together, not as a circlet, not as a weapon, as a storm of living gold. It tore through the crown-shaped cage Malrek had built from false foundation law, breaking the bars into molten fragments before they could close around Elara and Wren. Kaelor staggered as the old trap burned through his gauntlets and into his palms. Elara reached for him without thinking, and the moment her gold-wrapped fingers touched his bloodied hands, the crown fire between them steadied. The vault stopped shaking. For one heartbeat, king and servant stood inside the same flame, not fused, not claimed, balanced. The burning scale crown hovered above their joined hands, scales opening like the wings of a small golden dragon. Around them, the freed queens rose from the rings of fire. Wren stood closest, one arm around Elara's shoulders, her other hand lifted toward the crown as if greeting something ancient and wounded. Malrek backed toward the stairway. For the first time, he looked truly afraid. No, he whispered. It cannot answer both. The crown answered by turning toward him. Every scale along its body sharpened. Kaelor's voice came low beside Elara. What does it want? Elara listened. Not with her ears, with the gold lines under her skin, with the old queen names waking around her, with the memory of every hand that had held crowns and been punished for completing them. It wants the false law named, she said. Malrek's face hardened. Relics do not judge law. Wren lifted her head. No, hands do. Elara stepped forward, and Kaelor moved with her. The court above watched through the cracked altar ceiling. No one spoke. Not nobles, not priests, not servants. The entire kingdom seemed to be holding its breath beneath one question. Who had the right to decide what a crown required? Elara faced Malrek. You wrote a foundation law that demanded a queen beneath the throne whenever the king refused domination, she said. You called sacrifice stability. You called buried women peace. You called our hands low, born so no one would ask why the crown feared touching them. The burning scale crown flared. Malrek lifted his staff with trembling hands. I preserved Ashbourne. Kaelor's dragonfire rose beside Elara's crownlight. You preserved control. The throne needed one voice. No, Kaelor said. You needed one voice to whisper into. Malrek's eyes flashed. And what will you do without me? Let kitchen blood rewrite crown law. Let bound women judge houses older than conquest. Let a servant girl stand beside the throne because a relic likes her hands. Elara felt the old wound open. Servant girl. Kitchen blood. Low-born. The words still knew where to strike. But this time they struck gold. She lifted her hands. The scale gauntlets shimmered around her fingers, not as chains now, but as witness. My hands carried your plates, she said. Was that safe enough? My hands cleaned dragon blood from your floors. Was that low enough? My hands caught the crown you let fall, and suddenly they became dangerous. The servants above the vault went still. Elara looked up through the broken altar, toward the faces along the walls. Kitchen boys, furnace women, stable hands, cleaners, carriers, the unseen spine of Ashbourne. "If I had burned," she said, "you would have used my ashes to teach every servant never to touch royal power. But I did not burn." The crown circled her hands in bright molten rings. "So now let my living hands teach something else." Wren smiled through tears. Kaelor looked at Elara, as if the throne had shifted beneath him, and he was grateful for the fall. Malric snarled and struck. The red-gold wire from Severine's false circlet lashed from the floor like a serpent, aiming for Elara's throat. Severine moved first. She stepped into its path. The wire pierced the air before her brow and stopped, trembling inches from her skin. Severine caught it with both hands. The hidden root of the false aura still burned inside her, and pain crossed her face like fire under porcelain. Malric stared. "You foolish girl." Severine laughed once, broken and furious. "I am finished being your necessary thing." The wire burned her palms. Elara started toward her, but Severine shook her head sharply. "No, name him. End it." Kaelor looked at Severine, and for the first time, not as a consort, not as a failed crown, not as a political arrangement, as a witness who had finally chosen against the lie that made her. Elara turned back to Malric. The 7 freed queens stepped into a circle behind her and Kaelor. Each raised both hands. Gold light flowed from their palms into the burning scale crown, not feeding it as prisoners, but strengthening it as free women. The crown grew brighter. Malric stumbled backward. "Elara Wren," Wren said softly. Elara felt her mother's voice settle behind her. "Daughter of Wren Scale. Veyr." Another queen spoke. "Last heir of the severed scale, crown line." Another. "Hand that caught what kings let fall." The crown lowered between Elara and Kaelor. Kaelor lifted his burned hands, but did not touch it. He looked at Elara first, not asking her to crown him, asking whether she chose to stand in the moment at all. Elara's chest tightened. She did not owe him this. She did not owe the throne repair because the throne had been wounded by men who profited from its wound. But she thought of her mother beneath the hall, the queens in chains, the servants watching from the walls, the crown that had not asked to sit on her head, but to be made honest. She nodded. Together, they touched the burning scale crown. It did not close over Kaelor's head. It broke open. Golden scales flew across the vault, striking every hidden seal in the walls, every buried council mark, every foundation law carved under Malric's command. Stone cracked. Red gold wires burned away. False consort aura, false crown rights, false lowborn laws, all of them lit like dry parchment and vanished into ash. Malric screamed as the last seal broke. The crown turned on him, not to burn him, to show him. A vision opened above the pit. Every woman he had chained, every servant child he had hunted, every king he had kept unfinished, every consort he had dressed in borrowed fire, every law he had written so power would never have to admit it was afraid. The court saw it all. Malric fell to his knees. Kaelor's voice filled the vault. "High Crown, Sir Malric, you severed the queen line from the throne. You chained living women beneath my crown. You turned servants into hiding places and called their survival contamination." Elara stepped beside him. "And you made low-born hands carry the kingdom while forbidding them to touch its power." The burning scale crown descended toward Malric. He flinched, expecting fire. Instead, the crown melted into chains of gold around his gloved hands. The gloves burned away. Beneath them, his palms were blackened with old scale marks. "Stolen." Wren's voice turned cold. "He took brands from queens to write laws in our name." Malric looked up, ruined. The crown tightened around his hands. For the first time, the man who had decided which hands deserved to burn could not move his own. The vault doors above burst open. Dawn-colored fire poured down into the crown hall, and the burning scale crown rose one final time, waiting to decide whether Ashbourne would have a whole throne at last. The burning scale crown rose above the crown vault like a small sun with teeth. Every golden scale opened, each one reflecting a different face. Bound queens, frightened servants, dragon knights, noble houses, Severin with burned palms, Malrek, on his knees with his stolen hands trapped in living gold, Kaelor, standing crownless beneath the throne he had almost inherited whole through lies, and Elara Wren, the servant girl, whose hands had caught what the court had dropped. The crown waited, not for obedience, for truth. Kaelor looked at it, then at Elara. The old version of the moment was clear. Everyone in the hall could feel it. A king would step forward. A queen blood girl would complete the relic. The crown would close, the court would cheer, and the wound beneath the throne would be dressed in a better ceremony. Elara felt the danger of that story. It would make her beautiful to them, useful, forgiven, chosen. All the words courts used when they wanted a victim to become decoration before anyone had to answer for what had been done. Kaelor must have felt it too, because he did not reach for the crown. He turned to the crown hall above. "Bring down every council seal," he said. No one moved at first. Then the dragon knights looked at the bound Malrek, at the freed queens, at the servants watching with fear bright in their eyes. One knight lowered his sword and climbed the broken altar steps. Another followed, then another. Within moments, men who had once guarded the council's doors began tearing golden law plaques from the walls, carrying down scroll tubes, crown ledgers, bloodline registers, and old foundation tablets sealed in red wax. Malrek struggled against the living gold around his hands. "You cannot dismantle the crown law during an open rite." Kaelor looked down at him. "I am not dismantling law." The burning scale crown flared beside him. "I am exposing what pretended to be law." The first foundation tablet was laid before the freed queens. Renna reached for it, but her hand shook. Elara caught her wrist gently, steadying her. For one breath, mother and daughter looked at their hands together. Renna's cracked with gold from years of being bound. Elara's wrapped in living scale, light from the crown that had finally found her. The same blood, two different prisons, one survival. Renna touched the tablet. The carved words ignited. A voice rose from the stone, Malrek's younger voice, colder and smoother. "If queen blood rises after severance, one queen must remain beneath the throne to stabilize the crown." The court above shifted uneasily. Renna lifted her chin. "False foundation." The tablet cracked in half. Another queen stepped forward. "Built on coercion." The second crack split the stone into dust. Another tablet was placed. Then another. One by one, the laws Malrek had hidden beneath old ceremonial language burned open before the hall. Laws that named servant-born daughters illegitimate if their mothers had been erased. Laws that allowed queen blood to be sealed if the throne declared instability. Laws that permitted false consort auras during periods of crown uncertainty. Laws written in the names of dead queens whose hands had been chained beneath the very throne those laws protected. Every tablet shattered when touched by the women it had buried. Servants began to weep quietly along the walls. Not loudly. They had not been trained for loud grief. Elara heard them anyway. Malrek's face twisted as each law broke. "You think this will make the kingdom stronger? You are cutting out the bones that held it upright." Kaelor's voice was colder than the vault floor. "Bones taken from living women." Severin stood slowly near the stairway, still clutching the burned wire that had once rooted her false aura to her body. Blood and gold had dried across her palms. She looked at the freed queens, then at Elara. "I wore their fire. she said. The hall quieted. Her voice trembled, but she did not look away. I knew it was borrowed. I told myself, every crown is borrowed from someone. I told myself I had earned it because I had suffered for the chance to stand near the throne. She looked at Malrek, and I let him teach me that another woman's erasure was simply the price of my becoming visible. Elara watched her carefully. Severine's words did not erase what she had done, but they did something the court did not know how to do. They stopped hiding behind elegance. Severine stepped toward the pit, lifted the red gold wire, and held it out to Renna. Break it. Renna did not take it. She looked at Elara, not because Elara owed Severine mercy, because the choice had to belong to the living woman who had almost been burned by that borrowed fire. Elara took the wire. It pulsed weakly in her hands, hungry for another brow, another title, another woman desperate enough to wear pain as proof. Elara closed her fingers around it. The burning scale crown moved through her palms. The wire melted into harmless gold dust. Severine exhaled once, as if a blade had been removed from somewhere too deep to name. You will answer, Elara said. Severine bowed her head. I know, not as crown consort. No, not as Malrek's necessary thing. Severine's mouth tightened, but she nodded. As myself. Elara looked away first. That was all she could offer tonight. Kaelor turned toward Malrek. And you, Malrek laughed through clenched teeth. Kill me, then. Let the new court begin with honest blood. No. The word came from Elara. Kaelor looked at her. So did every queen. Elara faced Malrek, and for a moment she saw him as he wanted to be seen. Architect, savior, necessary monster. A man who had committed ugliness so history would one day call him wise. She would not give him that shape. You do not get to become a clean ending, she said. The burning scale crown descended, circling Malrek's bound hands. You will keep your hands. His eyes flashed with confusion. Elara's voice steadied, and every day they will carry the records you buried. Every name, every law, every queen chained under your orders, every servant child hidden, because you taught the realm that low-born hands were safe only when they were carrying other people's burdens. Malrek's face went pale. Renna stepped beside her daughter. He will read them before the court, Kaelor finished. Before every house in Ashbourne. The crown tightened around Malrek's hands, not crushing, not burning them away, but marking them with bright scale gold. Every stolen brand surfaced on his palms, visible now, undeniable, for the rest of your life, Kaelor said. Your hands will show the crimes you wrote into law. Malrek looked down at his palms and made a sound too small to be called rage. The burning scale crown rose away from him. Then it turned to Kaelor and Elara. The vault stilled. This was the moment the court had been waiting for. The whole throne, the completed crown, the king and the queen blood heir. Standing on opposite sides of the old wound, Elara felt every eye trying to push her toward meaning. Servant to queen, low-born to chosen, ashes to gold, all clean lines, all easy stories. She stepped back. The crown stopped. Kaelor saw. He did not reach for her. He did not ask why. He only waited. Elara drew a shaking breath. I will not be crowned tonight. A murmur rushed through the hall. She lifted her gold-wrapped hands. My mother was freed tonight. The queen line was unburied tonight. The laws that called us low, born, and dangerous have only begun to break. If I stand beneath a crown now, the court will pretend recognition is the same as repair. The burning scale crown hovered quietly, listening. Elara looked at Kaelor. And you should not wear it whole tonight either. The hall went silent enough to hear distant flame. Kaelor held her gaze. For one breath, she expected anger, a king's pride, a ruler's fear, the old hunger to close the wound quickly and call it peace. Instead, Kaelor bowed his head once. Then I will not. The crown flared gold. Not disappointed, pleased. The 7 freed queens lifted their hands. The burning scale crown unfolded into a circle of living scales and rose above the broken vault. It did not settle on Kaelor. It did not settle on Elara. It floated between the crown hall and the crown vault, half above the throne, half above the place where the queens had been chained. A crown not yet worn. A crown witnessed. Kaelor turned to the court. Until the queen line is restored in law, until every false foundation is burned, until the servants taken from royal blood are named, and until Elara Wren chooses whether she wishes any place near my throne, the burning scale crown will remain unworn. Malric stared at him as if he had gone mad. The nobles looked worse. Kaelor's voice deepened. If that makes my reign incomplete, then let Ashbourne learn the difference between incomplete and false. The dragon banners bowed again. This time, every servant in the hall saw it. Elara felt something loosen in her chest. Not healing. Not yet. But space. Rena took her hand. My little scale. Elara turned to her mother, and all the power, all the law, all the crown fire faded behind the impossible truth that Rena was standing beside her. You came back, Elara whispered. Rena smiled sadly. You opened the way. I was afraid. I know. You still am. Good, Rena said softly. Fear reminds power to ask permission. Elara almost laughed through tears. Kaelor heard. A faint change touched his mouth. Not quite a smile, but the beginning of one he did not know what to do with. Then he stepped toward Elara, slowly, stopping far enough away that everyone could see. He did not claim the space beside her without invitation. Elara Wren, he said. The whole listened. Not servant. Not soot girl. Not relic tainted. Her name. You owe my throne nothing. Her throat tightened. Kaelor continued, voice rougher now. But if you choose to stand in this court as witness while we unmake what was built beneath it, I will hear you before I hear any counsel. A nobleman near the upper tier made a strangled sound. Majesty. Kaelor did not look at him. Especially the counsel. Elara looked at his burned hands, then at her own gold-wrapped fingers. The crown had not made him safe. His choices tonight had only made him possible. That was enough for a beginning. I will stand as witness, she said. Not consort, not queen, not ornament. Kaelor bowed his head. Witness. And if your court tries to make my hands useful before it makes them free, I leave. A low shock moved through the hall. Kaelor's eyes burned amber gold. Then I will make sure the doors remain open. Elara believed him. Not fully, not blindly, but enough to stay one more breath. Above them, dawn broke through the high windows of the crown hall. Light touched the suspended burning scale crown and scattered across the chamber in living gold. It fell over freed queens, shaken servants, silent nobles, a ruined crown seer with marked hands, a false consort without borrowed fire, and a king who had chosen not to wear power until the women beneath it could stand. Elara looked up at the crown. For the first time, it did not look hungry. It looked patient. The court that had gathered to watch a servant girl's hands burn now stood before Elara Wren, daughter of Rena Scale Veyr, last heir of the severed scale crown line. Her hands had not turned to ash. They had taught the crown to wait.